Yeah.
This book.
Yeah, the one that you show a picture there. Because I
Yeah.
got the Malta, but I don't have this one.
I'm trying to think if this book, he may have it, but you would have to double check with him because it's
Yeah.
not a common book.
Okay, I have
He
to
may, he
check
may
it out.
have it. He may have it, but I'm not 100% sure. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Some people are online on Instagram. Okay. All right. Well, I think everybody's here. So let's go ahead and start. Um, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. All right. So we're going to, inshallah, begin our study of fiqh, and will be an introduction to fiqh according to the school of Medina, the school that is attributed to the scholar from Medina, Imam Malik ibn Anas, radiallahu anhu. So before we even get into all that, I'm gonna cover a couple of things. One, what is fiqh? Why do we study it? Two, we're gonna go a little bit particularly about this book and its approach, and then three, what will generally be my approach to teaching the class. So why do we study fiqh, right? Why is it that we even study fiqh, and what is the meaning of fiqh, right? So faqaha in the Arabic means to understand or to comprehend. As it is in the context that we normally use it, fiqh means generally how does one perform certain acts of worship or other religious acts in Islam, whether we're talking about how to do the prayer, how to do wudu, right? How to wash before the prayer, or like maybe some of the rites of Hajj, like making tawaf around the Kaaba, circumambulating, right, the house of Allah in Mecca, to many, many, many other things. So that is generally the meaning of fiqh, is the study of how to do various acts of worship in Islam. And so one of the major subcategories of fiqh is what we call fiqhul ibadat, specifically on the study of how to perform devotional religious acts, again, like prayer, like fasting, and so on. So that's the general meaning of fiqh. Why do we study fiqh? Well, we have to, anything that we do in Islam, we have to do with both knowledge, right, with ilm, and it has to be with adillah. It has to be with a proof. There has to be a legitimate reason to do so, not because it's based on somebody's culture, but because either it's something from the Quran, or it's something from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or something from the companions and like that. So there has to be a reason, right? How do we justify why we do what a thing is? And so that brings us to this particular book. As you can see, for those of you online, the book is called al-Muhadhdhab min al-Fiqh al-Maliki wa adillatihi. So the name of the book is significant. Al-Muhadhdhab, al-Muhadhdhab, which is different than al-Muhadhdhib. The hadhaba or tahdhib means to trim or to prune. So let's say you have a bush, a rose bush or a fruit tree, and you want to trim back some of the overgrowth. We would call this tahdhib. That practice is called tahdhib, pruning. And so the significance of muhadhdhab is the pruner, right? It is that which prunes. So if you think about the pruning shears that you would use to trim like your rose bush or to trim your tree, that would be the muhadhdhab. And the one that is the trimmer, right? You trimming it, you are the muhadhdhib. So the book is written by an Algerian scholar. His name is Muhammad Sukhal al-Majjājī. Muhammad Sukhal al-Majjājī. And so he is calling this book al-Muhadhdhab, the pruning of Mālikī Fiqh and its adillah and its proofs, because over time, and I'll read a little bit from the book. The reason why is that the study of fiqh can easily get so comprehensive, so massive, and so large that it can be quite intimidating for the adept or the beginning learner of fiqh. It can be overwhelming. Like, man, this is so huge. You go to like a Muslim bookstore like Jarir. You go to Jarir in Anaheim, and you go to the fiqh section, and there is not only book upon book upon book of fiqh, but there are massive volumes. Matter of fact, I just purchased a 20-volume work. I just purchased like a 20-volume work of a commentary on Mālikī Fiqh, right? Now, that's obviously not going to be in any way remotely accessible for a beginner to say, here you go, pal, here's 20 volumes, knock yourself out, right? Like, it's, and you might even say, well, why 20 volumes? Well, that's another story, right? But Shaykh al-Majjājī understands that, just like for every topic that we study, there is beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Whether we're talking about anything in Islamic studies, whether you're talking about mathematics, whether you're talking about literature, right? There's Alif, Ba, Ta, there's A, B, C, D, and then, there's, Scarlet's Web, and then there's Shakespeare, right? I mean, there's like, let's just learn the alphabet, let's learn a simple kids tune, and then there's like really advanced stuff, right? And so likewise in the study of fiqh, what we are just in our beginning. And so I chose this book because his whole methodological approach of writing this book was to take the study of Islam, of how to worship Allah, and to trim back for the beginner all of the unnecessary commentary and just to give it to you straight, right? Just to give it to you straightforward. So that's going to be the general approach to how we're going to go. And so I'm going to read just a little bit here in the beginning of his book, because I want you to in the author's own words, what he's saying. So he begins with, Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu, wa nasta'inuhu, wa nastaghfiruhu. All praise belongs to Allah, of whom we seek his aid and whom we ask for forgiveness. Wa nastahdih, and whom we seek guidance from. Linur al-ilm, right? For the light of knowledge. Min dhulumat al-jahala, we seek the light of knowledge from Allah, from the darkness of ignorance. Wa nas'aluhu al-wiqaya min al-wuqu'i fi imayati ad-dalala. And so we ask for his protection from falling into blameworthy misguidance. And then on the next page, Amma Ba'd, he says, continuing, he says, فَهَذَا كِتَابٌ فِي الْفِقْهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. He said, this book is a work on Islamic fiqh. So first off, even though it is particularly a book based on the madhab, or the school of thought that we call the Maliki school, or the school according to Imam Malik, he said that number one, this is about Islamic fiqh, right? So that's important to understand, because he wants to also, while we are studying from a very particular methodology, right, from the methodology of Imam Malik and his students, and from that location, at the same time, he's like, I don't want to encourage an undue sense of ta'assub, or an undue sense of being clannish or cliquish in the study. And this is something that I have seen over the 30 plus years of studying Islam, is that sometimes students can get a little bit cliquish when it comes to fiqh. in that it instead of one, making us more sincere in our devotion to Allah, increasing our knowledge to how to worship Him appropriately, that it's like, well, I'm a Hanafi and you're a Hanbali and he's a Shafi'i and she's a Maliki. And so instead of like, okay, we have some slight differences, but we're all Muslims, it's like, I even had people say, Imam, I'm Shafi'i, I'm going to go to the masjid and the Imam is a Hanafi, should I pray behind him? I'm like, are you insane? What kind of question is that? That's not the study of fiqh. That's not what fiqh is to do, right? We do have our schools of thought, but it's not to increase it. So he begins by saying, فَهَذَا كِتَابٌ فِي الْفِقْهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. This is about studying the acts of worship in Islam. على مذهب عالم المدينة مالك ibn Anas al-Asbahani. So it is according to the methodology or the school of thought. That's what a madhab is. You will hear madhab. Madhab in English we can say is what? A school of thought. And it's a school of thought according to Alim al-Madina, the scholar of the city of Medina, which of course we know is what Medina to Nabi alayhi salam, the city of the Prophet. So we have the two major cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina. Medina is shorthand for what? Medina to Nabi, because when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he left Mecca and he went to Medina, when he made the migration, when he made the hijrah, it became known as Medina to Nabi, the city of the Prophet, and then later on just simply shortened to Medina or Al-Madina. And so it's the scholar of Al-Madina. And so this tells us about what? Imam Malik was from Medina. He was from the city of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his name, shorthand, was Malik ibn Anas. Malik, the son of Anas. Anas was his father. Who was Anas? Anas himself was Anas ibn Malik. Anas ibn Malik was one of the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And so his son, that was named after his father, was named Malik, and he became the great scholar of Medina. And their lineage goes back to actually Persia, because his name was what? Al-Asbahani. He says, الذي ورد فيه على ما تأوله بعض العلماء الخبر الصحيح. And so Malik, Imam Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, may Allah have mercy on him, is the one that was mentioned according to the interpretation of many of the scholars of a sound report in which it was said, يوشك أن يضرب الناس أكباد الإبل. Soon will come a time in which people will beat the flanks or beat the livers of their camels. Literally beat the livers. What does it mean? Because on a camel, on the side, that's where the liver is at, the organ. Well, what do they mean? When you're riding a camel or a horse, sometimes you hit the side of it, you tap the side of it to make the animal go, to make it go faster. He said there will soon come a time where people will be encouraging their riding animals to rush to go to the city of Medina, right? فَلَا يَجِدُونَ عَالِمًا أَعْلَمُ مِنْ عَالِمِ الْمَدِينَةِ. But they will not find a scholar who is more knowledgeable than the scholar of Medina. And according to a great many of the scholars of hadith, of the statements of the Prophet ﷺ and of his companions, they said what? That scholar was understood and interpreted to be none other than Imam Malik. And he is if you go throughout the various schools of thought, Sufi, Salafi, Sunni, even amongst the Shia, Imam Malik is somebody regarded with respect and is seen as a knowledgeable person. And so indeed he is of the Salaf. Now when we hear Salaf and Salafi is a ideological, methodological movement, right, in its own thing. But the term Salaf just refers to like the early generation of the Muslims. So Imam Malik is essentially a child of one of the companions of the Prophet. And so technically we would call him a tabi'i. He is somebody that was a successor or came after the first generation of the Sahaba the first generation of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's also a very early source of knowledge about the religion. So his father knew the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes right back to that. And so he's the one that generally is considered to be what? The one mentioned in this report. So the Shaykh al-Majjājī, he says, أدعه بين يدي لطلابه والمشتغلين به. So he said, what I have put before us, right, for this work on Mālikī Fiqh, for the students of it and those who work with it, وَسَائِرُ الْمُتَفَقِّهِينَ فِي الدِّينِ اللَّهِ, and those who are the doctors of the religion, the mutafaqqihin, the people of fiqh, the people who practice fiqh in this religion of Allah. وَقَدْ نَسَلْتُهُ مِمَّا تَيَسَّرَ لِي مِن مُصَنَّفَاتِ فِي هَذَا الْمَذْهَبِ الْجَلِيلِ. And so he said, I plucked or I pulled out from the essential aspects from all of the different musannafat, from all of the different works on particularly on Maliki Fiqh, and there's a lot of them, and it can become overwhelming. So I pulled out the essential parts of them from this beautiful school of thought. دون أن أقلد فيه كتابا بعينه, and this is important. He said, so that this work is not solely reliant upon one other book that came before it. يكون أصلا له ولا في متنه ولا في شرحه, nor was it solely reliant upon one particular text or one commentary. And so in all schools of fiqh, you have your foundational texts that became extremely influential and very important. Some of you may have heard of Mukhtasar Khalil. Mukhtasar Khalil, which is what? The abridgment of the work of the great scholar Khalil, which is a book on what? Mālikī Fiqh. And that's like a major foundational text. And from that, there are many commentaries on it. Another might be Aqrab al-Masalik, right? Another great book of Maliki Fiqh. And again, these are big works that also had many big commentaries on them. And he's saying that what I don't want is for people to, again, get into partisanship. Oh, well, I'm only going to take from Aqrab al-Masalik. Oh, I'm only going to take from Mukhtasar Khalil. Oh, I'm only going to take from al-Akhdari or al-Ashmawi. And he said, no. I don't want to introduce the initiate student into the study of fiqh by having them being overly bogged down with a lot of details, and also thinking that, well, this is the only text or the only scholar or the right. I don't want to instill a partisanship in it, but rather we just want to study the fiqh itself. And so this is his methodological approach to the book. So he says, فَقَدْ أَجْهَدَتْ نَفْسِي على قدر ما يسر الله وفتح في تحذيب فقه هذا المذهب السني. And so I really strove hard, right, to the extent that Allah made it facilitated and opened up for me to refine the study of this school of thought in terms of its ahkam, just with ahkamin wa adillatan, both of its injunctions, of its rulings, and also from its proofs. So he's going to pare it down. There might be umpteen number of, this is the command that Allah gave, and there are 59 or 11 different Baskin-Robbins opinions of this or that scholar, and those are great for the advanced student, but they are highly distracting for the initiate. So he said, no, we're not going to go and start off by having to drown in the weeds. We're going to keep it very, very simple. And so he says, what? وَمِنْ أَجْلِ ذَلِكَ سَمَّيْتُهُ al-Muhadhdhab min al-Fiqh al-Maliki wa adillatihi. And that's the reason why I called it the pruning manuscript as it relates to the study of Maliki Fiqh. ورجوت بذلك أن يكون اسمه مطابقا ليسماه ومضمونه ومصداقا لعنوانه. That is, and it's my great hope that this work will indeed be worthy of its name. It will be truthful to the meaning, right, and of its title. So I just wanted to give you that as it related to the beginning. Now, as we go every week, I might go a little bit to the biography, to the author, and a few other things, but I don't want to, again, I want to keep it fairly light in each session. And so today, we're going to just cover a short study of the opening chapter about purification. But I did want to relate this hadith. Right? What is fiqh and why do we study it? Because again, the word fiqh, those of you a little bit familiar with Arabic, fa, qaf, and ha. And this is a word that does appear in this hadith. So in this one, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Muawiyah, the companion of the Prophet, the son of Abu Sufyan, he said, Huwa ala al-minbar. He was on the pulpit preaching, like giving a khutbah, in which he said, Ayyuhan nas, O people, innahu la mani'a lima a'ta Allah. Right? That there are none that can prevent whatever Allah wants to give. If Allah wants to give somebody something, whether it is in terms of something material, whether it is knowledge, whether it is piety, whatever Allah wants to give, la mani'a lahu. There's none that can prevent it. Wala mu'tiya lima mana'a Allah. And likewise, if Allah prevents a person from receiving something, then there is none that can thwart that effort. وَلَا يَنْفَعُ ذَا الْجَدِّ مِنْهُ الْجَدِّ. And that a person cannot bring benefit to their own selves, no matter how much effort they exert, except that Allah allows it to happen. And then the last part, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا. Anyone that Allah wants good for, يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. He gives them understanding of the religion. He gives them fiqh, because in the word, in the last line, for those of you that know a little bit of Arabic, I can highlight that word right there. There is the mention of the word fiqh. When Allah wants good for a person, He gives them fiqh. He gives them what? Comprehension of the religion. And so now we're going to begin the book. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So this is from ṭahārah. This is from the book on what? The major chapter heading in the book, and it begins with what? Purification, ṭahārah. The word ṭahārah in Arabic means purification. Why is purification important? al-Majjājī, hafidhahullah, says what? الطهارة المشروطة لصحة الصلاة نوعان. That purification, right? The types of purification that are conditional, that are a necessary condition for prayer to be valid. Because he's going to begin what? I mean, there's other things that you need purification for, particularly in the Maliki method, like for instance, touching the Quran. There are other madhahab that differ, and I will say an hour. I don't know if you're Maliki yet, but when I say hour, where I'm speaking on behalf of myself, right? But in the Maliki madhab, it is not permissible to touch the mushaf, a Quran that is all in Arabic. I'm not talking about English Arabic or an English translation, and Arabi, mushaf Arabi, a Quran that is all in Arabic. It is not permissible to touch it except that you are in a state of ṭahārah. Right, except you are pure, you have purification. But that is secondary. He's beginning with what? The salah. Why is salah so important? Because what is the first pillar after shahada? Islam has 5 pillars. The first is shahada. You believe in Allah. You believe Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Right? And then the second pillar of Islam is what? As-salah, the prayer. So just to show you what, he is designing this book for the initiate and to what? Take care of the things that are most important. The most important thing that you have to get to after you give your testimony is the fulfillment of the prayer. And prayer has its shurut, it has its conditions by which it can be performed. So when we're studying ṭahārah, that's ṭahārah al-mashrūṭatu li sihhati as-salāti naw'ani. So there's 2 major types of ṭahārah. The first one, Al-awwal taharatul hadath. So even if you don't speak Arabic, it's important, if you can, to just memorize a little bit of the Arabic terminology. And so that's why, if you can see the slide that I have online, I have transliterated the word hadath, right? The first type of is taharatul hadath. And that is a kind of purity that is a bestowing one, right? It is a kind which grants purification, such as al-wudu. So there are things that cause hadath. What are those things? Like, if you think about it, if you use the restroom, if you urinate or you defecate, what do you have to do if you want to pray? You make wudu, right? If you pass wind, you have to make wudu. If you have deep sleep, you have to make wudu. If you vomit, you have to make wudu. If you temporarily go insane, you have to make wudu. So these things that take away your ṭahārah, they are called al-hadath. Those are called al-hadath. So he says, وَهِيَ الْوُضُوء وَالْغُسُلُ وَمَا يَنُوبُ عَنْهُمَا وَهُوَ التَّيَمُّمُ. So there are major and minor forms of hadath. The minor forms of hadath, as we said, what? Urinating, defecating, deep sleeping, not light sleep, like you fell asleep for a minute and you wake up, no, but deep sleeping. Those kinds of things, like passing wind, those are minor forms of hadath. And they can be corrected by performing wudu. Then there is the major form of impurification, and that is also a kind of hadath, like if you have sexual relations. And this doesn't only mean ejaculation. It can mean a man could have a wet dream. And if you ejaculate in your wet dream, then you are now in a state of major impurity. If you have sexual relations with your spouse, either a man entering the private parts of a woman or a woman having a man entering her private parts, again, doesn't have to come to orgasm or ejaculation, just the touching of those private parts. This, then you're in a state of major impurity, still hadath, which can then be corrected with al-ghusl. Ghusl, the word ghasala means to wash, but in this context, ghusl means to take a full bath. What we might think of today as a shower, although we'll get to that in a minute. Again, in wudu, when you perform the wudu, the major limbs of it, right, are what? The hands, the arms, the top of the head, the face, and the feet. But when you make a ghusl, you must wet the entire body. The entire body must become wet. And so you have hadath saghir and hadath kabir. The minor forms, we said what? Urinating, defecating, sleeping, passing wind, and then the other one. He says, then as a substitute, when neither one of those can be performed. So let's say you're in some condition where you don't have water to make wudu, and you don't have water to make ghusl, whether your hadath is major or minor, but what? وَعَلَيْكَ الصَّلَاةِ. But you still have, the prayer still must be performed. There is a substitute, as he says, what? وَمَا يَنُوبُ عَنْهُمَا. And then a substitute for either of those, if they can't be performed, is something called at-tayammum. At-tayammum. Now we will get into what tayammum is in a moment, but what? It is essentially a form of dry washing that can be performed either with soil, It can be performed by touching a rock. But we'll get into how. We're not going to get into the how of doing wudu or ghusl or tayammum. He's just laying out these are the three major forms of taharatul hadath, purifying one's self from the types of things that take your purity away. That is called hadath. Yes.
So istinja has to fit in here somewhere, right?
We're going to get to that in just a second.
All right.
Right? So like, if, for instance, Matt was saying, well, what about istinja? What about when you relieve yourself? Like if you're urinating, that you must clean the private part with water and so on. So yes, we will get to that in just a moment. But that's really like a subcategory. So I had a typo here. See if I can fix my typo. There we go. Again, that's going to get into the kayfiyah. We're not at the kayfiyah. We're not into the how to or the performance of it. We're just now in the defining aspect of it. So that was the first one. That's called what? Hadath. The second one was athani. I must have really been wa athani. There we go. Had some typos there. It's called taharatul khabath. So the first one is hadath. The second one is khabath.
So hadath means impurity.
Hadath, both of these are impurities, but the first one is one that takes purity away from you.
Okay.
The second one prevents purity from taking place, meaning that you cannot have purity until it is removed. And so he says, what? Taharatul khabath wa hiya izalatun najasa. So it is the means of removing that which causes impurity. So now we're going to address what Matt was just talking about. If you go and you urinate, right, what do you have as a remnant once you finish urinating? You would typically have a little bit of urine on yourself. And so you must do the izala. You must remove the najasa. You must remove that thing that is impure. So khabath is all about the removing of impurities, and he lists the most common types of things that it will be removed from. An thawb al-musalli, like from the person, because again, we're talking about for prayer. So if you're going to go pray, you have to remove the najasa, you have to remove the impurity from your clothing. Wa badanihi, from your body. So that's like you urinate, and you have to remove the urine from the male or the female private parts. That's why it has to be washed with water. Wa makanihi, and even including from the place of which you're going to go pray, like your prayer rug or even the spot on the ground. Maybe you're praying and you don't have a prayer, just wherever you're praying, there has to be clear or clean of anything that is a najasa, that is najis, any type of impure, in any kind of impurity, right? Alladhi yusalli fihi, of which the person is going to pray at. So we're talking about what? Clothing, the body, and the place of prayer. These are the three major concerns of al-khabath. Al-khabath. Those things that are considered najasa or najis, they are impure. And so how are we going to deal with that? Now we go to the bab. So in the books, they will say kitab and bab. Kitab is like a major chapter, and then the bab is the subheading, right? So now that we are still in the chapter of talking about purification, now we're going to get to the chapter a little bit into the starting to enter into the process of purification, right? So babul maya, the subheading on waters. It's actually al-ma'u is the singular, while maya is plural. It's a kind of plural, which means we're going to deal with all types of waters. Well, so it says وَتَحْصُلُ الطهارة بالماء الطاهر في نفسه المطهر لغيره. So purification can be obtained by water. That is, it says what? Is بالماء الطاهر. Ma طاهر means what? Pure water. Now, I'm not talking about Evian or Fuji or something. We're not talking about that kind of pure, because we will see here in a minute that is not necessarily the case. But pure water, in and of itself, right? في نفسه, that is what? al-Mutahhir لغيره, that has the capacity to be a purifying agent to purify other things, namely us, or our garment, or our place of prayer, or our body. So that's what water does. He says, وَهُوَ الْمَاء الْبَاقِي عَلَى أَصْلِ خِلْقَتِهِ. Sorry, that's another, man, I gotta fix all my typos here. The khilqatihi, right? So it's going to be ala asli khilqatihi. So we're talking about water that has remained essentially in its essential state. Aw al-mutaghayyir, or that has been through some type of change. بما لا ينفك عنه غالبا لموضعه قراره ومروره كالملح والمغرى. So either we're talking about pure water that's kind of basically in its initial state, or water that has been through a kind of change, but the changing agent generally doesn't separate from the water, right, in its natural state, right? That could be, for instance, like salt water. So yes, if you take water and you evaporate it, you will have salt left over. But if you go in the ocean, like when you put your hand in the water, like you don't feel the individual grains of salt, right? It's essentially it's emulsified, or it's blended into the water. Now you can taste it, but you can't feel it. And so for this reason, salt water is permissible to make wudu with, so long as the salt generally is not perceptible by the eye. Like again, you don't put your hand in the ocean and you can like, oh, I can feel all this salt. No, but if you taste it, like, oh yeah, this definitely is salt water, but you don't feel it. So whether you're talking about water out of the tap that has, that's like that, or water from the ocean, these are both considered permissible water for ṭahārah, for performing acts of purification. But he says, in addition to that, not only like salt water, but he lists something also, al-Mughra. Al-Mughra can mean also, like maybe you ever been in a river where maybe it's rained, right? Maybe there's a rain and you go to the river and it looks brown, right? It looks a little bit brown, but again, if you were to put your hand in the water, you can't necessarily feel the individual particles of sediment, but it has changed color. This is also something considered generally to be permissible for wudu. Right? So he says what? Whether you're talking about كالملح المغرى. And so أو تولده فيه كالتحلب, أو water that is naturally occurring, right? Something in so-called in nature that has something in it. Tel, what he says, what? Tuhlab. Tuhlab means like either moss or like algae. Again, you might go somewhere, or even in the ocean, like you might go to a certain part, like where there's tide pools, and maybe there's kelp. Right? There's kelp there. So there's something in the water. It can cause a change in the color. You see it there, but it's still considered to be طاهر. It's considered to be pure water. So he says, كتحلب ومنه الماء النازل من السماء. Another example would be rainwater, As he says, what? Al-ma'u nazilu min as-sama', water that comes down from the sky. And this could also mean snow or hail. Anything that comes, as long as it changes back into obviously water, because you can't use hail, but if if you melt it, right? Water that comes from the sky, rain water, this is perfectly fine. He says what? وَمَاءُ الْبَحْرِ, or water from the ocean that is obviously going to what? It's going to have salt in it. And what? وَمَيَاهُ الْآبَارِ, well water. If anybody's ever been in a rural land and you get water out of the well, it may have a very metallic taste to it. It's got all those elements or sediments in it. So what? Mayahul abar wal uyun, as well as from a fountain or a spring, right? From a spring, wal anhar, and from rivers. So all of these, though they will differ today, what we know is kind of just turn on the tap, right? Now, we may not be comfortable putting some of that water in our mouth due to issues of, say, like bacteria or whatnot. And then once we get more into the breakdown of how to perform the wudu, because like one part of wudu we commonly associate is what? Washing the mouth. But this is actually from the fadila. This is from the extra acts, but it's actually not from the wajibat. It's not from the fara'id. It's not from those that you have to do. So if you're in an area now that we understand, oh man, you know what? The water in this lake or the water in this river, it's known to have an issue. You might not want to have protozoa or whatever. You could still use it to make wudu, but you could just leave out the part where you put it in the mouth. But the water itself is considered to be ma'un tahir, pure water. Ishaq.
Alaikum. I have a question. So all of the examples that are given, the source of the water is from not a stagnant source, but from a moving source. Are there any concerns in regards to the source of the water? Does it have to be, like in this example, from some type of natural moving source, or can it be a stagnant source like a pool of water?
Why are you rushing me, man? See right there? You see the final thing?
Oh, there you have it.
See? See why you rushing me, man? We getting there. See, somebody always got to ask a question. Yes, that's a great question. Does water have to be ma'un jari? Does it have to be water that's flowing? What if we have an instance where the water is not flowing? Right. So continuing in the subheading here about the types of waters. فَإِذَا خَالَطُهُ شَيْءٍ مِّنْ غَيْرِ مَا سَبَقَ, if something other than what has previously been mentioned mixes with that water, فَغَيَّرَ أَصْلَ خِلْقَتِهِ, and it causes some type of change in its nature, فِي لَوْنٍ أو فِي طَمَعٍ, in its color or in its taste, أو ريح, or in the way that it smells, فَقَدَ صِفَةَ الطُّهُورِيَّةِ, then it loses its purifying capacity. So let's say you have some water, whether it's in a stagnant pool or even in a river, and let's say there's an oil spill or there's some gasoline in the water, right? The gasoline would change what? Its lawn. Might change it, have that weird, you ever get like oil in the water or gasoline, it has got that weird iridescent film, right? So that's going to be what? It's going to change its essential nature from its what? Filon. It's going to change its color. It would also change its what? Taman. Like water that's going to have gasoline or some type of oil in it, it's going to change what? Taman. Aw rih. It's going to smell. In that case, فَقَدَ صِفَةَ الطَّهُورِيَّةِ, it's going to change its capacity to be purifying, and that water cannot be used for wudu. فَصَارَ حُكْمُهُ كَحُكْمِ مُغَيِّرِ, and so It loses that, and its status becomes like that of some other altering substance, right? Meaning that it's no longer water that can be used for wudu. وَيُكْرَهُ الطَّهَارَةُ بِمَا اسْتُعْمِلُوا في طهارة سابقة من الوضوء أو غسل. And so he says, also, it is disliked, makruh. Now, this is important for those of you that are new to this. There is a technical term in fiqh. One of them is the word makruh. It comes from karaha, which means to dislike. Now, this is important. When it comes to a thing that is makruh or disliked, it doesn't mean it's haram. It doesn't mean that it's inviolable or impermissible, but it is disliked. So water that has been used to make wudu or to make ghusl, and the leftover water of that wudu or ghusl process is then reused. استُعْمِلُوا فِي طَهَارَةٍ سَابِقَةٍ is reused again, right? Then it is what? Makruh. It's disliked to do so. Now, maybe you don't have any choice because that's all the water that you had, then okay, I suppose, but even then there's a couple conditions, right? But he said, even where a small amount of water, وَبِيَسِيرٍ حَلَّتْ فِيهِ نَجَاسَةً لَمْ تُغَيِّرْهُ. Even if only a small amount of things that were like impurities that were mixed with the water, but generally hadn't changed it. So, maybe you went to the bathroom and then you used some water to clean yourself, and then you couldn't see any change in either the color, the taste, or the smell, but nonetheless you use that to clean yourself. Then to go, it's generally disliked, even though water is able to be a cleansing agent for those things that are what? Najis, for those things that are impure. However, it's far more preferred that such water be discarded or used from other, water your plants or whatever, right? And go get fresh water than to perform, right, your purification, your wudu, or your ghusl.
So,
right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
So I have a question. So what if you have a bowl? What if you have a bowl of water and you're making wudu from that bowl? And as not to get water all over the place, you're making wudu over the bowl. So as you're making wudu, some of this water is dropping back in the bowl.
Yes. So look, what he says is, right, so go back. وَيُكْرَهُ الطَّهَارَةُ what? بِمَا اسْتُعْمِلُوا, meaning that you have your bowl, you're making wudu. As you're doing it, some of the water drops back in the bowl. What he's saying is when you have completed that wudu, you wanted to then hang on to that water or give it to somebody else to make wudu. Not in the process of doing it, this is fine. Yeah. Right? But what he's saying is that you finish your wudu and you wanted to hang on to that water or give it to the person next to you and then they use it. No, that he's saying is makruh. That is disliked. But in the process of it, then a little bit, no, that's not what he's talking about, right?
Enough.
Another type is water that he calls al-mushammas. Al-mushammas, right, from the word shams. Water that's been sitting out in the sun because it's what? Stagnant. Not water that the sun shines upon, but water sitting in a vessel that's sitting out in the sun that becomes what? Stagnant. وَمَا وَلَغَ فِيهِ الْكَلْبِ, and water that a dog slobbers in. And this goes to show that in the Maliki Madhab, we make a differentiation between domesticated dogs and feral dogs. The feral dog and its saliva is najis, is impure. And if it touches you, you have to make wudu. You have to clean yourself, you have to make izala, you have to move the wild dog saliva, and then you have to make your wudu. But for a domesticated dog, no. And this differs from the other madhahab, the other schools of thought. However, it's still disliked that if a dog, even if it licked a little bit, it would be better to just discard that water, or again, go go water your plants with it, right? And get new fresh water to make wudu. So he says what? وَمَا وَلَغَ فِيهِ الْكَلْبِ. He says, yeah, وَلَغَ with غَاين, وَلَغَ فِيهِ الْكَلْبِ. He says what? إِذَا كَانَ يَسِيرًا عُرْفًا. Even if the amount of water was small, right? And so he said also, وَيُكْرَهُ الْإِسْتِغْلَالِ فِي الْمَاءِ الرَّاكِدِ. It is also disliked to bathe in stagnant water. Disliked, not haram, but disliked. So stagnant water for here by saying اغتسال. Ightisal means both wudu and ghusl. Ightisal means what? Both doing wudu and the full body wash. It is disliked to do it with water that is stagnant, not meaning that, okay, you pour some water in a bucket and that's stagnant. No, it means water that's been sitting in a stagnant state. Right? If you take water and you pour it and put it in a bucket, that's not stagnant. Yes, it's not moving, but that's not considered. We're talking about you put it in a bucket and you set it there for a couple of days or something, and it hasn't moved, and it's been exposed to the elements, and it's been exposed to the sun, and it looks like stagnant water. There's been some mosquitoes in there, and it's disliked to use that.
So is there a distinction here between like water that's like left out in an open container in the sun and like because I know traditionally in some places they have something called cisterns, right? Where
Yeah.
they like collect rainwater over time. And nowadays, like we have water towers. In fact, a lot of places, pretty much all the water out of the faucet comes from a water tower.
Yes, this is not again stagnant. That's why he puts along with the stagnant water al-mushammas, right? Meaning that what? It's something that's open and exposed to the elements. A cistern generally is not just open to the elements unless it's also then subsequently going to go through some type of purification process, right? Now you might have like some big open rain container, but then before you would use that water, you might put it through a filter or go through some other type of filtration process, right? And so that would not be considered. Or if you as you collect it, it's covered and sealed and it's not, again, openly exposed to the elements, then this is not the same. This is not considered ma rakid. That is not considered stagnant water. Stagnant water means that it has a kind of staleness to it. Either the collection of film, bacteria, has a certain, iffy look to it, right? That is what is meant by ma'un rakid. That's what's meant by stagnant water. And so this, again, this is not exhaustive by any means, but the book is, again, what? We're going to give you the basics. We're going to get you out of the gate so that, can you make wudu with stagnant water? Can you make wudu if a dog happens to look at it? Yes, you can, but it is makruh. And so what he's just letting you know, there's a few things that are disliked. Obviously, what is preferred is just simply get some fresh water. Now, we haven't gotten to how to perform the wudu. Inshallah, we'll do that next week. But just giving you these simple breakdown here about the two main elements of ṭahārah, right? Going back as we conclude here, the two main elements of ṭahārah are what? Al-hadath and khabath. How do they differ? Al-hadath is that which takes your wudu, takes your ṭahārah, it takes your ṭahārah, takes your purity away from you, like urinating, defecating, passing wind, deep sleep, and so on, or in its major form, right, sexual relations or ejaculation. Then in the other, khabath, it is dealing with those things that are impure and purity cannot be obtained unless they are removed. So it deals with izalat al-najasa, removing impurities, and water is the agent by which we remove impurities. I'll put in one little anecdote here before we end. So for instance, when people pray, this happens a lot. Like right now, you can't see, but like on the ground, we have an area where there are so-called prayer rugs, and then there's just the general carpet that's in the center. Now, when people come in, and especially in Jumu'ah when it's packed, everybody wants to pray on the prayer rugs. Nobody will pray on the carpeting that is part of the installation of the center itself. And they will rob themselves of the benefit of praying in the first row. Because we know when it comes to performing the prayer, there's more ajr, there's more reward to be in as-saf al-awwal, in the first row. And so people will say, oh man, I got to stop where the prayer rug is. And so the question would be, is there anything on the ground that is apparent to the eye, not to the microscopic examination? Is there anything on the ground apparent to the eye, out of which we've discussed, that is najas, that is impure, right? And so here, there's a little saying we have in English, God made dirt, so dirt don't hurt, right? And so dirt or a little bit of dust, while we may not enjoy that, we may not want that, is not in itself impure. And so you can pray on that carpet unless there is evidence with the eye, oh man, there is urine or feces or blood or some other thing here that would prevent me from doing so. And so it would have to be cleaned with water to purify it. But if that isn't the case, then that makan, that place is what? ṭahār. It is pure. And you can pray there. So don't become overly committed to the prayer rug to rob you of the benefit of praying in the first row. You know, embrace a little bit of the dirty life, right? And get more reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah. So that's the part we're going to cover today, just very simply about ṭahārah. Inshallah, next week, we will continue on with this. I will probably circle back around and just cover a little bit of the commentary that he gives underneath it. Matter of fact, if I can show you quickly for those who are online. Let's see, let me stop sharing my screen so you can see the camera here. I just want to show you the breakdown of the book. So on the very top, he gives here the matan. On the very top here, he gives the matan. For those of you online, he just gives really what the qawl, as we say, هذا هو القول. This is what the madhab says to do. Very simple breakdown. And then underneath that is either commentary or something about the adillah, about here. And his method is to, one, read this part first. You read through this part first, and then you circle back to this, because he wants there to be a flow. He doesn't want there to be a lot of disruption or interruption, because he said this is something that is not beneficial for the student. He wants there to be something in a succession of steps. In fact, maybe we'll touch on this next week, but just briefly what he talks about, he says, وَحَاوَلَتُ أَنْ أُرَتِّبُ فِيهِ الْأَبْحَاثِ, right? I made an attempt to arrange the chapters in such a way, وَجَمَعَتُهَا وَتَفْصِيلًا وَتَرْتِيبًا, so that we will get all of the essential details and in a particular order. He says, يَجْعَلُ الْقَارِئُ لَهُ بِأَمْعَانٍ وَذِكَاءٍ, so that the intelligent reader, a perceptive person, can then, essentially get the gist of what is being discussed. He said, يَشْعَرُ أَنَّهُ يُسِيرَ فِي خُطًا مُتَتَابِعَةً, so that the person feels that they're generally proceeding or progressing in a logical, orderly fashion, right? And that is hard to do when you are bogged down with excessive detail, excessive questioning, but rather go through the qawl, go through what the madhab says first, and then you circle back around, so that one, you just become literate and familiar with generally what's being discussed, and then as you progress, you slowly fill this in with greater detail. So that is overall his methodology of the book. Yes, Ishaq.
So like I have two questions. So in the name of in the title of the book and the approach of the book, part of it is discussing the proofs for discussing the proofs. So in regards to what we discussed today, have we not got to the proofs, or how are the proofs, how are the proofs identified?
Yeah, we haven't got to that yet. We'll do that, maybe next week or the next couple of weeks. Right now, we're just reading through the qawl, and then we'll circle back to the adillah.
Now, and the second question, maybe this gets addressed next week. If so, we don't have to talk about it now. So you said in regards to wudu, in regards to tayammum, in regards to ghusl, we'll get into the kayfiyah next week, right? So I had a question in regards to the requirement to do one versus the other. Is that something that we'll talk about next week? Like the expiration of one versus the other.
Oh, okay. Eventually, we can talk about that next week, or you can shoot it to me offline, because again, there in this class there will be a mix of people that are like new Muslim, new to fiqh and whatnot, and so I want to try to keep the amount of questioning to a minimum. But if there's anything that you have, of course, you can just you can text me, shoot me an email, shoot me a thing on WhatsApp if there's something more particular. But I do want to try to keep the questioning in the class just to I don't want to say none at all, that would be ridiculous, but to more of a bare minimum, just so that when people walk away from the class, it's like you let the material kind of sink in. But if there is something that you get to and you're like, man, I really want to know, you can ask me offline. I don't have a problem with that.
So just as an example, like that particular question, is that something that you would prefer for me to contact you directly, or
like if that's something generally not covered in the material, then I would prefer it as an offline question.
No, got it. What I'll do then, I'll just wait until next week's class, and if it's not covered, then I'll just reach for you offline.
Okay, inshallah. All right, well, inshallah, we're going to take a little break here, and then we will, for those who are going to come back again, at 10, we'll do our first reading from Sahih al-Bukhari, from the Kitab al-Imam, from the Book of Faith, inshallah. So we'll take a brief respite from that, and inshallah, we'll see you in a few minutes.
Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim?
I'm sorry?
Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim?
It's not Sahih Muslim, sorry. If I said Bukhari, yes, Sahih Muslim, inshallah, min Kitab al-Iman, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah.
Wa yakum. والصلوات الله تعالى على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.